Yeah. Okay. Hold on. I have yeah. Hold on. Why I'm not seeing this now? Okay.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Namaste, assalamu alaikum. Good evening, good night, or good morning to all of you, and happy 76th Republic Day to India. We are pleased to have people in this meeting from all parts of the world in different time zones. I am Shakira Mohammed from Trinidad and Tobago, a teacher for the past 17 years. And ladies and gentlemen, this is the 244th edition of our ICC Thought Leaders Forum. We wish to sincerely thank all of you who have contributed in whatever way to the success of this ongoing Pan-Indo-Caribbean and Pan-Indian Diaspora Global Project. For 243 unbroken continuous weeks, we have been here every single Sunday. And in the past 4 years, 8 months, and 1 week, we have featured 1,096 presenters from all parts of the world, speaking on 243 topics. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a weekly forum being hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center, a legally registered research and publishing company operating since 2010. And today we are pleased to be supported by Raj Jadu of Trinidad and Tobago. And ladies and gentlemen, in order to continue this weekly program and to make it bigger and better, we are asking for suggestions as well as volunteers. If you give a donation, your name will be placed on our poster and all promotional materials, and you can contact Dr. Kumar Mahabir for details. I'll introduce our moderator today, who is Shalima Mohammed, the co-director of this ICC Zoom platform, who is a business teacher and researcher from Trinidad and Tobago. She obtained her master's degree in business psychology from Franklin University in the USA. Shalima, welcome.
Thanks so much, Shakir. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Namaste. And a warm welcome to all of you. Happy Republic Day to India as well. I want to say thank you very much for choosing to be here with us. This program is being recorded on Zoom and live streamed on the YouTube channel of the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center. Welcome to all of you on YouTube at this time. To avoid intrusions from trolls, our IT manager has muted everyone. Speakers, please do not admit anyone, do not unmute anyone, and do not allow anyone to share your screen. Thanks so much for your cooperation. Today, we are talking about migration and brain drain in the Indian diaspora. Indian indentured labor migration began what is today considered to be the largest overseas Indian diaspora globally. Migrants from the Indian diaspora have boosted the populations of the United States, Canada, the UK, and several other countries. Emigration of
Okay, I'm sorry. I think her connection.
countries. But it has also resulted in substantial remittances, knowledge transfer, and the creation of global networks that benefit both the home and host countries. According to data from the Pew Research Center, Indians are the third largest undocumented immigrant group in the US. In response to US President Trump's crackdown on immigration, India's Foreign Minister Subramanyam Jaishankar told journalists that India is open to the lawful return of undocumented Indian immigrants from the US. How will this move impact migrants? Will developing countries be as welcoming of their immigrants as India? These are some of the questions we hope to have answered from our panel of esteemed speakers today. And we welcome firstly Professor Anisur Rahman of India. He's a professor at the Center for West Asian Studies at Jamia Millia Islamia University in New Delhi and co-editor of the book titled Migration, Diaspora and Transnationalism, South Asian Experiences. Welcome, Professor Rahman.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much indeed to be the part of this great event. Can I start now?
Yes,
Thank
you can
you
go
so
ahead.
much.
She can put your
Yeah, thank
slides.
you so much indeed for having provided this great opportunity to become the part of this great event. So on this occasion, I am congratulating you all to the 76th Republic Day being celebrated by our great country, India. So on this occasion, I have got this privilege to talk about Indian diaspora or international migrants who have gone from India to different parts of the world. So today it is indeed a pleasure for me to be the part of this great event. So I have been asked to speak for only 15 minutes. So I will try my level best to another time, and I am going to just open the slide because if we miss the time, definitely I think it will not be good because many panelists are here to talk. So let me now open the slide, and with the help of the slide, I will talk to you all. So thank you once again for having provided this opportunity indeed. So this is okay, I guess.
Yes, it's good.
Okay. Thank you so much indeed. So already I have been introduced, so I am not going to, I think, dwell upon. So we know all pretty well that the mass immigration of technically skilled people from one country to another country across the nation state has been referred as the brain drain. So I am going to basically focus about migration and brain drain phenomena. What is basically is there, and what is migration and brain drain in the Indian context. So we know pretty well that the migration of skilled and semi-skilled laborers from post-colonial India, that is indentured labor during the colonialization and slavery, and under the mercantilism, have all contributed to the development of Indian diaspora group around the world. As just we have got that India is the second largest or the first largest diaspora community who are spread about the in many country of the world. At least 125 countries have been identified by this high level committee on Indian diaspora at the turn of the century. So two stages can be basically talked about the post-colonial Indian international migration processes. The first stage involved highly skilled workers migrating to developed Western nations, and the second one is the IL and the Gulf countries are basically the West Asian countries. So we know pretty well that about 18 million Indians are working in different parts of the world. So here we will definitely talk about much more about the Indians who have gone to the industrialized countries of the world, United States of America and European Union, especially the United Kingdom. And of course, after the 90s, many more countries like Germany, France, or even in Australia, New Zealand, Indians have gone to these countries. But the other phenomena to which we should also talk about the semi-skilled, unskilled and the semi-skilled workers. That is the area of my interest and specialization in the early 70s when the oil boom took place. So large number of South Asians started going to that region, and India is a leading country in that sense also. So if we see the total size of the Indians who are working in the Middle East or the West Asian countries are estimated to be around 9 million, or approximately a crore. In 10 million Indians are working over there. So there's a lot of data, and there's, I'm talking about the data which has been provided by the Ministry of External Affairs. So previously it was only confined to Kerala or the southern Indian states, but now the Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and other northern Indian states have taken the lead. So relating to North Indian states, I am undertaking one of the very important project. What is the impact of migration on the migrants' families, especially in the northern area, that is Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and Rajasthan? I have taken three northern Indian states. So what basically we should talk about the Indian uh, brain drain phenomenon. What is this basically? So we all know that India has emerged as a preferred investment destination over the last 2 decades. At the turn of the century, we have seen this. So one of the key drivers for this preference is the availability of the skilled workforce available at the competitive prices. So this basically situation puts India at the position of continuous growth, even as the world was facing or is still facing a huge economic crisis. So this is very important. So according to the Indian External Affairs Ministry, we have seen, and it is witnessed that 2.5 million Indians migrate overseas, making Indians the world largest overseas diaspora or diaspora community. So this is very important to discuss. And data over 1.6 million people have relinquished their Indian citizenship since 2011. That was leading to loss of billion in tax revenue for India. So this is phenomena is being referred as the Indian brain drain. So this is very important to talk about that one. So how this thing is going to take place, especially in this globalized days? What is the benefit of this migration? Basically, the Indian diaspora. We will just discuss about that one. So what are basically the reasons of the brain drain? So we all know that one reason is higher education. Basically, Indian students or Indians have started going at the turn when India got independence. So one of the top most reason for young students who started going out of India as the current education system is that one. Means if you see the situation of our own country in India, I think if you see the total size of the higher education institutions, it is one of the largest system, or we can say just second or the third largest system. So far as the case of quality is concerned, there is a serious crisis. So we need to improve upon that. So it is one of the reasons, definitely. And the other is equitable employment skilled workforce. So that is also the everyone wants to be paid or rewarded for their efforts and the talents. So I think we need to see. So these are the reasons. So other underlying reasons, we can say that having stated the primary driving factors that we have talked about, means unemployment and the adverse situation and many push-pull factor, both combining together are the responsible factor. So here, if we need to think about some of the deeper aspects of the Indian culture that are related to the brain drain phenomena, so we know that India has been the colony of the British Empire. We know British, so it is one of the reasons. So while the colonization disrupted the traditional system in India, it brought several reforms that radically changed Indian culture, such as the ideology of liberty, equality, freedom, and human rights. And the other is, we can say that the mindset of the millennials. Nearly half of the India's population is estimated to be the young population today. So this is very, very important. So we know that the millennials have different mindsets from their predecessors. It means they have become very practical and they need immediate job and opportunities. So this kind of thing are the responsible factor we must talk and we must know. So, what are the recent trends of the brain drain from India? That is very important to understand. So, we are witnessing and we are saying, so there is some sort of need is required, some sort of remedial measures are required. That India has long faced the challenges of brain drain. Because it has been going since India's independence, and that is, of course, in the ascending order. The magnitude and the number is increasing like anything. And we have seen that between the 2015 and 22, I think 1.3 million Indians left the country, and many of whom were highly educated professionals. So we have to see. And the one thing again, it is very, very important to share with that. I think 4,300 even top level business tycoons have shifted their business to Dubai. So we it's a point of worry, it's a point of discussion, it's a point of that should be taken into account. So what is basically, many studies have been done by many economists and social scientists, and they have come with the idea that the early stage of migration from India to the United Kingdom was based on colonial linkage with the post-colonial India. Just after independence, we know pretty well that because many institutions came up in India and they produced a highly qualified ITians and the engineers, doctors, and they basically, after the post-World War, I think they opted to go to Europe and, of course, even the United States of America. So, and they levelized its policy to attract these highly talented persons or the qualified persons. So here it is very important. What is basically the stock of the Indian migrants in the first world, in the industrialized countries? That is again very, very important. So we know that about 18 million Indian migrants are there. Out of the total stock of these migrants, almost one fourth and more than one fourth of the migrants have gone to the United States of America or European countries, United States of America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and other countries. So this is very important. It is the largest example of brain drain that has taken place from India. So if you see this issue and these statistical facts and the figures, I think this is very important that almost three one fourth of the total population, migrants population, diasporic community, are working or they have settled down in that very region, first world, or what we call it industrialized or the developed nation. So that is very, very important to take into the account. But three-fourths of the migrants are in the other developing nations. And one of the example and one of the glaring example to which we all know that is called Middle East or the West Asia, or more specifically the Gulf countries. So already I have shared with you that 9 million Indians are working, and that is very important. So here a little bit thing have been given. What is the size, what is the volume, what is the number of the Indians who are in the respective country, UK, that has been given, and then United States of America, Canada. So this is the data which has been provided by the UN. DESA. And what basically here I would like to just share with you that what are the challenges basically of the brain drain in India. So of course challenges are there. So now India has the vision to take our country or take this nation into the category of the developed nation, means Vikshit Bharat by 2047, when we will complete our century. So it's a point of discussion, it's a point of worry. So there will be some sort of policy decision should be taken into account to intervene. So one is the loss of skilled workers, no doubt about that, and loss of innovative ideas. This brain drain can lead to a loss of innovative ideas, research, and the development. I think we cannot deny this fact. And the loss of confidence, brain drain can also lead to a loss of confidence in the economy, which can cause more problem for the public, and the loss of tax revenue. So every I think if we see the development process, it is one of the very I think impediment factors, impediment issue that must be taken into economic inequality. Again, brain drain can worsen economic inequality, which is there. So there's a lot of empirical studies has been done, and with the help of that, we have got to do. And the loss of investment in education, that is also, and loss of critical services and increased operational cost. Brain drain can, I think these are the devastating things. These are the worrisome points which has been created by this brain drain. So how to managing problem of the brain drain, that has become the need of the day. Unless until we do this, I think we will not be in a better position. So one is the changing mindset and the education system. Of course, there's I think now we have had the many policies in 68 and then 86. Now in 2020, there's a national education policy. I think a lot of structural changes and the promises have been done in order to catch up, or in order to catch up with the fast changing economic or the society around the world. So that is very important. So here changing the mindset and education system has become the need of the day. Investing more on research infrastructure. So government of India is promoting more research infrastructure for enhancing knowledge, building capacity for a skilled professional. That has been done, but there's a need to do much more. And employment opportunities, we need to create employment opportunities. So government of India is also promoting equal employment opportunity for a skilled and the professional India for preventing brain drain. So there's a direct intervention in this way. So what extent it is going to take, I think we need to examine, we need to make more practicable. So it is called Vikshit Bharat, developed nation and the brain drain. So brain drain is creating a lot of issues. I think we need to take. So the brain drain directly threatens the Vikshit Bharat vision, the plan to become a developed nation by 2047. So as of 2023, India stands as the fifth largest economy with GDP of over 3.8 trillion, almost 4 trillion, and that is going to become 10 trillion by 2030. And definitely, unless until we do, I think we cannot catch up. I think this vision, our mission will not be effective. To become a developed country or the Vikshit Bharat by 2047, India must record an annual growth rate of 8%. So it's not an easy task. So there is a need on the part of this skilled manpower or the human resource. Human capital has become the very important one. So IT industry alone could contribute 1 trillion to the economy by 2030. But the ongoing exodus means migration of talent is a very I think important issue that must be taken into account in order to realize, in order to catch up with this. So Vikshit Bharat, developed nation and management of brain drain problem. So how we, I think, lot of things have been given. So many programs and the policies have been initiated. Has taken the initiative by the government of India in order to prevent, in order to manage. So there will be enhanced funding for education and the research to curb the brain drain and to retain its talent. India needs to rethink its approach to education and the research. As we all know that, I think unless until we take these account, social sectors means education, research, and of course health, I think things will not move in the right direction. So currently, there is India's education is spending of 3.1% of the GDP, which is pathetic in the sense that if you see the national education policy of 68, even in that policy, it was said that 6% GDP would go for education. Again, it was repeated and reiterated in 1986, last national education policy. And it is interesting to share with all of you that again, it has been in this latest national education policy, it has been said. But if we see the practical aspect, and I think it has not been implemented. So we need to see this thing in a very, I think, important way, in a very focused way, in a very profound way, I think then we can think of high caliber research institutions, improve funding for research, and a specialized program in technological field could make staying in India more appealing for the skilled professionals. So one thing again I would like to show you, this diaspora community has everything, means they have the skill, they have technology, they have even education and everything, even money. I think we need to work as how to engage them in a more profound way, in a very vigorous way. Then we will be able to realize the Vikshit Bharat or the developed nation. So here expanding the startup ecosystem, of course, many already I have shared with you, many initiatives have been taken by Government of India to catch up and to see this. So India's startup ecosystem has become a key driver of economic growth, with 90,000 startup contributing 400 billion to the economy. But again, there's a lot we have to do. This localized support can not only fuel innovation, but also strengthen the regional economies, creating a more balanced development landscape. So here, what is the role being played by the public-private partnership for innovation? Again, what I would like to, because time is running very short. How much time I am having? 5 minutes more?
Actually, it would be nice if you could wrap up now. Thank you.
Okay, you give me 2 minutes only. So
Sure.
collaboration between public and private sector is essential to drive innovation in fields like artificial intelligence and all these things. So here already I'm just showing, and then financial incentives for the returnees, means how we are going to attract this. So unless until we do something in the domain of higher education and research development, and of course we need to have the collaboration. So many incentives are required that could be given to these diasporic communities, these the people, highly skilled person, definitely they would be able to come over here, and they would come and they would serve. So there's a glaring example. If you see the scenario, I think Hyderabad, Bangalore, and many cities have come up with the support of these highly skilled persons, or the NRIs, or the PIOs. So that is again very. So what are the future of India? A vision for retention. I think again here it becomes very important to discuss. I think a budget is going to come, so we need to address this brain drain, the issue of brain drain, as how to convert this brain drain into brain gain has become the need of the day. So brain circulation in this globalized era, brain circulation, brain gain has become the need of the day. So we need to do it, because we have a very strong connection with this diasporic community. Definitely we need to work in this area, and there's a need academic research and all this, which has the policy implications, is again very. So need for skill India initiative, just I'm showing for the references, so I'm not going to. So here Government of India is doing, but there's a need to do much more in this area. So that is very important. So migration from India to the highly industrialized country is a result of deep rooted penetration of economic culture of migration among the skilled and the professional migrant. So lot things are required on the part of the government. There would be need of policy intervention. So then we will be able to convert this brain drain into the brain gain or brain circulation. So that time has come, because we have the vision to convert or translate this great nation into the category, or to we need to take up at par with any other developed industrialized countries of the world. So the brain drain or the highly skilled persons are very much required. So as we all know that, so I'm just one point. So India has the advantage of demographic dividend. If you see the average age of the population, so that is 28, and the majority of the population belongs to the category of the group of 15 to 35. So it's very important how we will be able to convert this young population into the human capital or the human resource that is going to contribute in a big way. And apart from that one, so not only brain gain, but also the brain creation, or the human capital formation or accumulation has become the need of the day. So I think diaspora is going to play a very important role in this way. So I think in this globalized age, how we are going to reap the benefits of the highly skilled persons. So we need to see, we need to have the policy intervention. So with these words, once again, I'm very, very thankful to the organizers and all the esteemed members, all the esteemed panelists who have joined this program to share their view points. So I will be extremely happy to take up your questions, observations, and the comments. So with these words, once again, I am very, very grateful to all of you for having provided this great opportunity to learn or to share my learning thoughts to all of you. Thank you once again. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Rahman. It was a very revealing presentation. And I want to pose two questions to you, which I'm seeing on the chat. Chand Gupta, originally from Fiji, now living in the US, she's asking, what is the proportion of outward brain drain versus NRIs returning to India recently? Can you say?
Sorry. Just repeat the question.
So the question is, what is the proportion of outward brain drain versus NRIs returning to India recently?
I think exactly, I don't remember, but it is a huge number. I think NRIs have shifted or NRIs have gone, means migration is still taking place. So it is in the rising trend. So exactly, I don't remember the number, but it's a huge number.
All right, okay. And Jay Nair wants to know, how is privatization affecting education standards in India?
I think it's a very moot question. I think we don't have any alternative. Let me tell you, we cannot say that privatization has adversely impacted the quality of education in India. If you see the scenario, I think if you see the gross enrollment ratio in our own country, it's very pathetic. It was very pathetic. Anyhow, we have managed to reach the level of 25-27%. And in this national education policy, it has been said that we need to take up to 50%. Because if you see the, I think, gross enrollment ratio in all developed countries, it is above 60, or in case of Germany, it is 70%. If you see in the United States of America, over 85-90%. In case of South Korea, 95%. So what basically I am just proposing that I think there's a regulation in our own country that how to regulate the private bodies, also private university or private educational institutions, because there's a need, there was a need, or it has become inevitable to have the collaboration between the private public partnership has become the need of the day to address the issues relating to, I think, quality as well as the quantity, access to education. So many things are there. So how we are going to regulate, how government is going to regulate these private bodies or private institutions is a question. So now we have gone beyond the question whether private institutions are going to be stopped. So since 90s, I think we have opened now. The government is saying, and India has opened the border for foreign universities. So foreign universities are going to come in our own country. So let us have the healthy kind of competition so that we could meet the requirement of the population. So here is a country, I think that is called demographic gift or demographic dividend. So lot has to be done. So if we wish to convert the total population, young population, into the human capital or the human resource, so there is a need to have private bodies, foreign universities. But here government of India is here to regulate all these institutions, so we can have the rightful kind of, I think, output or the outcome of that. So that is the purpose, and that is the philosophy, and that is the thing that should be taken into it. So whether it is public bodies or the private body, it hardly matters. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. And one more question from Dr. Rosan Kanhai. She's asking, do you have information on the remittances back to India?
Yes.
India.
Yes, I think, let me tell you, I think we are getting a lot of remittances. So India has become the first country to since 2010. And if you see the latest data receipt of the remittances in our own country, 125 billion dollar India has received. But definitely we cannot say that all these remittances which are coming on account of the highly skilled migrants, but rather unskilled migrants. But it is, of course, the outcome of the total diasporic community or the migrants who are working there. That's why I am saying that there is a need for India to have a very thoughtful or the profound kind of policy, comprehensive policy as how to convert this population. Because in case of India, I think demographic dividend is going, and it will not stay for all times to come. I think it is going to be over by 2055. So it's a golden chance for India to convert this population into the human capital, human resource. And of course, it will be very effective for our own national economy. And whatever the surplus capital or human capital, human resource would be there, we can supply anywhere. And in return, we will get a lot of remittances. And these remittances are being used in order to eradicate poverty, inequality, or to a certain extent unemployment. See, 18 million Indians are working in different parts of the world, especially to the Middle East or the West Asian countries. So we are getting a lot of remittances. So how we can consolidate the remittances or increase the remittances again? Because it could be used as a strategy developmental strategy. So we have been dominating in case of the receipt of the remittances. So that should continue. And this kind of a strategy, how we are going to deal with the labor market or our labor, what kind of requirement would be there in times to come, we need to study and we need to see. Otherwise, there would be a steep competition even in South Asia. Many countries are working in the West Asia or the Gulf countries. So we need to see. Yes, please.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I know it's very late in India. It's about it's after 1 now. So I want to thank you very much for your contribution and for taking our questions at this time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's my indeed pleasure.
Excellent. Let's move on now to our second speaker, and this is Professor Lomarsh Roopnarine of the USA. He's originally from Guyana. He's professor of Latin American and Caribbean Studies at Jackson State University and the author of the book titled The Indian-Caribbean Migration and Identity in the Diaspora. Welcome, Professor Roopnarine.
Thank you. Do you have the PowerPoint up?
Sure, you should see that coming up now.
I'd like to apologize for my camera. Somehow it's not behaving today, but I'm assured that you are hearing me well. Let me begin by saying that I am a product of migration, and my ancestors were a product of migration. And to speak of migration, in particular in a Caribbean context, is not surprising. However, in my study of Indian migration, generally speaking, is that the Indian migration has not received adequate academic attention. And so there is an understanding, which is an unfortunate one, that Indian people in the Caribbean are pretty much non-migratory. They arrived from India, then they settled mainly in the agricultural areas, and have remained there. And I think that's a misconception. When I was doing research for my book, which was just stated, about 4 or 5 years ago, I ran into this problem because when I started looking for literature, I was really struggling. And so here's an opportunity perhaps to expound on this Indian Caribbean migration by stating that these people have always been migratory. From India, for example, you see on the screen here, from India to the Caribbean and back, and then internally from one rural area to an urban area, say, for example, from the Port of Spain, or New Naikiri to Paramaribo, or Berbice to Georgetown, Guyana. Now, the other movement, which I think is poorly understood or has not been given adequate attention, is the movement of Indians within the Caribbean, particularly in the what I call the Indo-Caribbean Caribbean, that is mainly between Guyana, Trinidad, and Suriname. And this movement is quite large, actually, especially one from in Guyana to Suriname. I mean, I was born and raised on the banks of the Corinthian River, and Suriname is only 20, 25 minutes away with a boat. And so that the proximity, the nearness of Guyana and Suriname promotes this migration, which has been very active. And I think more work needs to be done in that area to tease out these migratory dynamics in terms of how people live on a daily basis. The other movement, which has really captivated the minds of many modern Indian population, really, is a movement from the Caribbean to Europe and North America. Can you move on to the other slide? Yeah, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to concentrate, because of time, to the two periods, really, from within the Caribbean and then on to from the Caribbean on to North America and Europe, or Europe and North America. Well, the movement from the rural area to the urban area has produced really the urbanization of Indians. And this is when Indians began to change gradually, in a way, to take up the opportunities that came with the urbanization. For example, jobs in the civil service, be more educated, taking up opportunities at various universities and college, which are pretty much absent in rural areas. The movement also led to the transformation of culture, really, from somewhat Hinduism to Christianity, and all of that. Now, the other reasons that promoted or pushed this sort of movement within the Caribbean, really, it was because of education for jobs, political opportunities, upward and economic social mobility, which is really typical in a migratory circuit. These are some dynamics tend to happen within this any migration, actually. And so what has happened with the urbanization of Indians is that it did not really give up living in a rural area. They've established a sort of elastic relationship that, because of the distance, which is sometimes 120 miles to ranges to 150, so we're able to go back more regularly, which I find very fascinating. And in the process of doing that, there was sort of an internal exchange of what was learned in the urban areas and or brought back to the rural areas, and a vice versa sort of exchange. And I think this aspect of the Caribbean internal migration needs more research. Can you move on to the slide, please? Now, typically speaking, within the Caribbean, Indians moved really for religious and cultural reasons, and mainly because of the similarities between Suriname, Guyana, and Trinidad. But also, some Indians moved to other areas of the Caribbean, for example, to Jamaica. And because of also of political and economic tensions or ethnic tensions in the Caribbean, especially in Guyana, have really pushed the Indians to other areas. So that's the reason. And then the uneven development within the region. Because of this, the Indian migrants tend to move to better destinations where they can live a better life, if possible. But the problem with this intra-Caribbean migration, it is not always fluid. Yes, the movement to, say, Guyana, Suriname, or Guyana and Trinidad, there's some sort of fidelity there, some sort of less tense or less tension. But in the receiving territories of the Caribbean, despite the fact that these islands have shared a somewhat similar historical background, there are tensions between these, the sending and the receiving destinations, sometimes based on economics, sometimes based on this new arrival sort of victimization, based on ethnicity differences and so on. So, despite the fact that there has been a movement within the Caribbean, there are also Indian migrants tend to face quite a bit of challenges as well. Can you move on to the other slide? Well, this is a movement, as I said, has captivated uh, the region more as far as Indians are concerned, even in, in other areas of the Caribbean. The movement really was one started out between the former colonies and the metropole. For example, Indians in the British Caribbean had moved to England, the ones in Suriname went to Dutch, Holland, and so forth. That movement, even though it continues, it has shifted really from Europe to the United States because of reform laws in the United States, pretty much in the 1960s, that really encouraged or accepted Caribbean people more so than before. So that then the Indians who were moving to Europe and North America had now shifted to, say, Queens, New York, Toronto, Canada, where they formed diasporas. Now, the word diaspora is loosely defined. I mean, it's in the Indian context, it's really whereby Indians have moved and form communities of the departed homeland in terms of culture and otherwise. And they have a relationship back to their departed homeland. And this diaspora here has received quite a bit of attention, mainly because we live in a modern era, because of globalization, because of social media, and all of that help to sort of forge a connection, which is somewhat different, say, for example, an earlier movement from India to the Caribbean and back. And the mere fact that many of us are here on this platform speaks to the fact that we have more connection in this new diasporic movement, which started really in the after the Second World War, and it placed in the context of the Caribbean, mainly after when these islands or countries have become independent from the motherland, so to speak. And like any migration, there always have been challenges of settlement and integration. I don't have time to get into all of that, but the biggest factor, really, and to be bluntly about it, the the Indians or Caribbean migrants as a whole tend to move to societies or look different than themselves. And for example, in England, it's pretty much a white host society. In the United States, the white host societies, where there have been a natural clash of differences in thinking. Um, you know, um, One is raised in the Caribbean and all of that. So, despite the fact that Indians in the Caribbean, even all the Caribbean individuals, even though they've been exposed to, one can say, white culture during the colonial system, they have not been exposed enough to prepare them that when they move out of the base and into these developed countries, there has been a lot of problems of adjustment, especially the first generation. We now have the second generation, and we're emerging into the third generation. The second and third, they have been more of a sort of a positive integration, less so cumbersome, say, for example, the first generation. I hope I'm making sense here. All right, can you move on? Now, we talk quite a bit. I know this platform here is on brain drain, and a lot of things have been said already. Some of the basic things tend to happen with this brain drain. And by the way, when I say brain drain to my students, I have to define that term, and they say, really, how can you label this migration brain drain? So that's an area we can talk about later on in Q&A. But fundamentally, a number of things tend to happen when migration occurs from one sending environment or a sending place. You have a depletion of human resources, skill, capital fight, people taking their money, movable property. And also, one of the areas that have been overlooked is the separation of families. And typically, you know, when the parents leave, they will leave the children with the grandchildren, and sometimes the children grow up not remembering the contours of the parents' face. They tend to forget them, and despite the fact, as I said, we live in a social media world, there is some separation. There's anxiety, the absence of father figure, mother figure, and all of that. We can talk about later on. Can you continue, please? Now, the opposite of this is the brain gain. Whatever happened, so the bad things that happen in the sending environment, say we take Trinidad, for example, and the Indians now are going to North America, Canada, United States, or Europe. These destinations tend to receive this benefit. And as I said before, one of the biggest challenges of migrants in anywhere, really, in this case, the Indians moving into developed countries have been facing bouts of racism, rejection, and so on. But they also engage in nation building, or they also engage in politics. They can change who are going to lead that area, who's going to become the mayor, or even who could become the president of the United States. So they play a very meaningful role. But let me say this: the moving a population or a sizable population from the sending environment is not as bad as one thinks, because in many times, take Guyana for example, when people start to move out of there, it relieved the government from population pressure. It relieved the government from offering resources, healthcare, education, which the government at the time did not have. So it's not all bad when this brain drain occurs. Okay. Next slide. I'm moving along here quickly. Now, I believe that this is not a one-dimensional movement, meaning that people move and then the country tend to face a lot of problems, and then on the other side there are gains. I think what generally is going on is a brain exchange or brain circulation, as stated by the previous presenter. So what you have is an exchange of skills that have been learned overseas, like say in England or North America, and then they are then referred back or brought back to the former sending destination in ways which help to promote growth and development. There's something called the demonstration effect, that if you see in the workforce certain people are doing well, that might have a sort of domino effect. Other people want to copy that. Also, it can be a pushback to that, because sometimes in the former homeland, old habits are hard to break. People are willing to change. Okay, and the biggest thing with migration is remittances. I mean, there's something called a barrel economy in the Caribbean, where from the destination, the receiving destinations, migrants put a lot of things in the barrel, from sardines to clothes, to even bill money to pay for bills, all sort of stuff, and they will get through the immigration. And another thing that tend to happen with the brain exchange is the practice of transnationalism across the Caribbean, and then overseas developed countries back to the Caribbean, which is a good thing. But again, there's an exchange of ideas, exchange of communication that before this era, before say the 1950s and 60s, did not happen. And so the migrants or the immigrants arrive in the new destination, there's sometimes a shock, the surprise, or the challenge of integration, and so on, and so lead to demoralization. It also reduces nostalgia of homeland and back and forth. And a lot of Indians really engage in transnationalism on a daily basis. All right, go forward, please. What to expect in the future? The migration will continue because of a culture of migration has formed. Like all the ethnic groups in the Caribbean, migration has been embedded in the minds that in order to develop, one has to move. One has to move, despite or temporary or permanent. And then a hierarchy of migration will predominate, reflecting, say, the preference of the developed world, mainly because the image or the experience and all that better things could be had in developed areas. So the migration is going to be vertical from the less developed area to the developed ones, as opposed to say horizontal, say across the Caribbean, more so say from Suriname to Trinidad. Okay. And another feature is that it will be more outward and inward, meaning that these islands or the countries in the Caribbean will have to come up with policies to retain the skills they've invested in. Thank you, and thank you very much. That's all.
Thank you very, very much, Professor Roopnarine. Another excellent presentation. And I think I'll hold the questions until the end for you, because we have another Guyanese now living in Canada with his presentation. Let me introduce Dr. Raywat Deonandan. He's an epidemiologist and professor at the Interdisciplinary School of Health Sciences at the University of Ottawa and the chair in university teaching. Welcome. You can go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you so much. I'm going to share my slides now. Okay, you guys can see that, right? So thank you so much for inviting me here today. I'm an epidemiologist, which means I'm going to focus on the numbers today, and I'm cognizant of the limits of my time. So I'm also going to drill down and talk mostly about the migration of medical professionals, so the brain drain as it applies to medicine and related fields. So let's begin. So it may surprise some people or not to know that according to OECD statistics, about 70% of Caribbean people who have university or college degrees end up emigrating to OECD countries. That's the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, essentially the wealthy nations of the world. So tertiary education is a college degree, university degree, professional degree of some kind. 70% end up leaving. The medical brain drain, unsurprisingly, suggests that about 16% of doctors in wealthy nations got their degree in other countries. And this data is about 10 years old, so it's probably still on par, probably older, a bigger number than that now. So a substantial proportion of medical professionals working in wealthy nations came from abroad. And unsurprisingly, it's the USA and the UK that attract most of the foreign trained doctors, with, if this may surprise some people, but Israel has probably the greatest dependence on foreign trained doctors. It's not surprising because, of their immigration policy. So many of these individuals are Jewish doctors from the USA who've been transplanted back to Israel. So it's a bit of a misleading graph there. It won't surprise you again to know that the where these individuals are going to rather, the doctors primarily are going to the USA. Even though Israel has a largest proportion of foreign trained, the USA has a largest sheer number of foreign trained doctors. 42% end up in the USA. And among nurses, 45% end up in the USA. So they're clearly the desired destination. And where are they coming from? Well, in the UK, about a third of foreign trained doctors are coming from India. And the USA, about 20% or a fifth are coming from India. So India punches well above their weight in terms of the contribution of medical professionals to the world. But where are they coming from globally? Well, Again, I said India, and this statistic from 2021 suggests that about 75,000 Indian doctors have been exported. This number here, 7.3%, suggests that that is the proportion of the doctors who are in India that leave. I'm not sure that number works out. There are about maybe 2 million doctors in general in India. So a substantial fraction are being exported. A distant number two is Pakistan. That contributes about 25,000 professionals and so on down the line. But India, obviously, the world's provider of doctors. And if you look just at the USA, well, the USA, again, is the recipient of dramatically a large number of Indians. Number two, Pakistan again. But this is where we see the contribution of Caribbean sources, where Grenada and Dominica make the list here, but much less so than India. But why does this thing called brain drain occur? This has been touched upon by the previous speakers as well, but scholars in general reduce it down to three probable factors. Number one, we are seeking, I am seeking, because I'm an immigrant also from Guyana to Canada, right? I'm one of these individuals, seeking better economic opportunities, either for yourself or for your family, for your children. Number two, you might be fleeing corruption or some kind of insecurity. We do get a lot of people moving because of unsafe conditions having to do with war or mistrust of the government, something like that. And lastly, something we call intellectual wastage. And that is the lack of opportunity for career growth in your profession. If you spent all this time and energy and money building your credentials and suddenly there's an artificial ceiling on your ability to progress in your profession, well, you might seek out a country that allows you to progress. As a corollary, there's something called brain wastage. So in Canada, where I live, there's a problem with individuals coming here, doctors with degrees, who don't get the opportunity to be doctors. So their brains are being wasted. So you may seek out intellectual opportunity and be denied it. So there's some complicating factors at play. The economic impacts have been touched upon by previous speakers as well. There's this thing called remittances. What's a remittance? It's when an immigrant sends money back to their family. Right? And this actually drives a fair amount of global economy. Famously, much of Kerala in India was funded for many decades by Kerala workers in the Gulf states sending money back, and that contributed to the Kerala miracle of development there. But the Caribbean, it may shock you to know, is the world's largest recipient of remittances. It constitutes, 28 years ago at least, about 13% of the region's GDP. I'm not sure if that number has gone up or down, but it probably has not changed a lot. So Caribbean receives a lot of economic stimulus from its sons and daughters working abroad and sending money back. It's difficult to measure, though, because a lot of this remittance payments happens under the table. It could be cash, it could be sent by a Western Union or e-transfer. And a lot of that is not really logged or monitored well. So we don't know for sure. If you look at which countries in the world are sending or most dependent on these remittances, in 2002, which is the most recent data I have, unfortunately, I'm sure there's more recent data, but I haven't got it. Jamaica, amongst the Caribbean nations, was the leading recipient or dependence on remittance payments. Other countries like, Haiti's there obviously, right? Haiti is also a Caribbean nation, but Tonga was the leader. If you look at an average from 1980 to 2002, the story is a little bit different. So Grenada, over that time, was the largest Caribbean dependent on remittance payments. Guyana, which is my place of birth, makes that list in a meaningful way as well. And so all the Caribbean nations have some degree of dependence on these remittance payments. So it can be argued that these nations benefit from brain drain. Now let's see if that's true. First, who is leaving? Who are the people who are leaving? As noted, it's people with tertiary degrees. So this graph shows us that amongst people with tertiary education, that is university or college degrees, the dramatic majority are the ones who are going. So in Guyana, 89% of people with tertiary degrees leave. So there's a continuous loss of the most educated people. The flower, the intellectual flower of these societies are constantly being drained. And if we compare the price of training these people, the price of actually giving them an education, then the loss of their productivity when they leave, and compare that to the amount of money sent back, well, it doesn't really compare. So, yeah, there are some cases where you get more back than what you paid. I'm looking for an example here. Let me see. Maybe Haiti gets back a little bit more than the combination of what they paid. But in general, here in Guyana again, Guyana, a combination of 9.5% of GDP was spent on training individuals and uh, um, depending upon those individuals' economic activity. But you're already getting back 1.9% GDP in remittances. So there's a net loss. It's not economically feasible to be depending upon these individuals' remittance payments. So what do you do? How do you mitigate the impact of brain drain? And this is going to be a very short presentation, by the way. I'm going through this very fast. More time for questions. Well, number one, experts suggest that we minimize the losses to try to retrain highly skilled people. I'll tell you a story. I did a lot of development projects in various countries, Guyana included. One of the issues we found in Guyana was every time we trained somebody to take part in our project, they would leverage that training to expedite their departure to Canada or the USA. Suddenly, that's another line on their resume they can use to apply for that exit visa. So it became a disincentive to train them. It also became a great barrier to getting our development projects done. So in one HIV program I was a part of, within the first year, the HIV clinic was run by a very senior doctor. The next year, run by a junior doctor. The year after that, run by a medical student. Because at every stage, these individuals were leaving. They're using their seniority as leverage to leave, leaving behind a increasingly poorly run system. So you could try to minimize your losses, try to retain highly skilled people by a variety of factors, or you can accept that they're leaving and try to leverage the benefits of emigration more so. And maybe that's the way to go. I'm not sure. So some people call this a diaspora approach. You accept the fact that a diaspora exists, like everybody on this call. Many of us are diasporic, and we're contributing to this question. And among them, you could build networks of trade, tourism, etc. You could use the knowledge base amongst the diaspora to reinvest. I know that India does a lot of this. I'm invited many times to go to Indian universities as a member of the Indian diaspora to help teach there, to train. So seeing their diasporic members as assets rather than a crisis to be addressed. And lastly, maybe attract a higher form of remittance. My last slide is just a little caveat to the things I did not cover in these slides. The recency of data. The pandemic may have changed some of these data, but in general, the trends remain the same. There are some recent economic changes, like the supposed wealth in Guyana due to oil wealth. How's that going to change the system? It's unclear. And I mentioned brain wastage. So it's one thing to leave your country seeking opportunity. It's another to get to those new countries and realize the opportunities really aren't as great as you might have thought. Thank you. Those are all my slides.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dr. Deonandan. I was going to say it was a very data-driven presentation, but you've corrected that. It may not be as recent as we would have liked, but we did get sufficient information there to be completely inspired. I want to thank you very much. We want to bring another Guyanese who is living in the USA, and this is Mark Khan. His master's thesis in global studies from Brandeis University is titled Mitigating Brain Drain, Brain Waste, and Brain Circulation, India and its Diaspora from Colonialism to the Modern Era. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, we're seeing it.
Great. So my name is Mark Khan. I am the Director of Master's Marketing and Enrollment at Boston University, which is one of the larger research institutions in the US. I've been in higher ed for about 20 years. I studied philosophy and psychology, so I will not have as much data. This will be more of a philosophical discourse on what migration actually looks like. And I will add the reminder that I do love Guyana, and That's also the caveat that this comes from a place of love. However, assessing problems requires airing dirty laundry, if you will. So let's jump in. So from the colonial perspective, the Education Act in England marked the first legislation creating compulsory education for kids aged 5 to 13. What we saw was the colonies that were being run by British citizens, members of the Crown, also wanted their students, their kids to be educated as well. And that transpired in education spreading. So if we can say one good thing about migration and the indentured servant trade, it's that education was spread throughout the colonies. And that's something that you will see intermittently through not just elementary education, but all the way through to university education as well. However, creating an empire and maintaining it requires power asymmetry. And this is where the brain drain has probably had the largest impact. Having the educated leave their places of birth would also help keep the balance what it was, which is one person in power and others trying to claw that power away or potentially contribute in their own way to gain their own independence. So it was in the best interest, although education was something that was spread through the colonies, it was not because of benevolence. However, it was certainly meant to maintain a power dynamic that is inherent to the world that we currently live in. So just a brief rundown of some of the top sending countries. As you can see, India is the #1 sending country for migrants, similar to what my colleagues have mentioned as well. The top receiving countries are the US with 51 million, Germany, Saudi Arabia, the Russian Federation, and the UK. So again, with the lingua franca, English being such a common language and being predominantly used throughout the Caribbean, it's also not surprising that of the countries listed here, there's a lot of interest from the Caribbean, particularly in Guyana. So what is the brain drain? And we obviously have hit different sides of this. However, it refers to migration of highly educated individuals from less developed nations, Guyana included, to countries like the UK and North America, Canada, and the US. The higher levels of schooling that people have correlates to what Raywat, apologies if that's not how you say your name, mentioned as well, that the more schooling folks receive, the higher the propensity of them to actually leave the country. This is definitely something that we'll talk a little bit more about as well. The small islands and developing nations are the ones that are most impacted by brain drain, and also the skills depletion. You're going to notice that the folks, similar to that amazing anecdote that was shared, the folks that know the most are the ones that are highly regarded abroad, and they get scooped up and then they're replaced by someone who doesn't know quite as much. However, it's the same pattern repeated time and time again. So a little bit more about the situation in Guyana. I actually attended Enterprise Primary School. I moved to New York when I was 11. As of 2024, approximately 90% of university-educated Guyanese nationals live and work abroad. So these statistics are damning and very much aligned with what was shared previously. The World Bank reported Guyana has the world's highest migration rate of tertiary educated individuals at 89%. That has not changed in the 20 years past. So it's certainly still very high. Guyana's unemployment rate, and this is where the dirty laundry comes into play, is currently 12.43%. And this is on the heels of discovering oil and increasing its wealth and increasing opportunities. But youth employment and the age range of 15 to 24, this is when most students would be looking for opportunities to study abroad because they are not being fulfilled at home. But the youth unemployment rate is over 25%. So 1 in 4 of Guyana's young people is unemployed, which is a staggering statistic. It also forces those people to potentially look for opportunities abroad. And it perpetuates what we've seen with brain drain. So in the US, Caribbean immigrants are often employed in service occupations, production, transportation, management, business, sciences, and the arts. Specifically for Guyanese immigrants, however, the first one is health and medical services, followed by transportation, retail trade, professional services, and education. Why is this important? Because a majority of our tertiary educated individuals are coming to the US and other countries to teach in fields that are necessary for Guyana to actually progress. And that, unfortunately, is the stark reality with brain drain. If folks that know how to make things better are leaving the country to come to places where those opportunities can be expressed, it is rather difficult and at times not worth it for them to remain at home. And this is what brain waste actually looks like. So when there is the emergence of oil, where are the scientists that are going to help? When there is an emerging service industry, where are the folks that are capable of running large, high-end hotels? It's not just in the academic realm, but it also goes all the way down to service industries as well. So brain circulation, as we've touched on, is when someone leaves their country with the purpose of pursuing opportunities, but with the intention of returning. And this is very common, particularly in India, with students who study abroad for their undergraduate degrees or their master's degrees or their doctorate degrees. There isn't always the intention to stay in the country that they're studying in. There is a desire sometimes to gain experience there. This is where STEM designated individual programs, for instance, in the US, students can stay in the US for 3 years to work within their field, to gain expertise, but the intention is typically to go back home. This is not common in the Caribbean countries, unfortunately. So although brain circulation is an aspiration and one of the benefits, Fiji is one of the few countries where they receive many more educated people than they have the ability to educate at home, but Fijians want to come back. Reverse brain drain is what India is actually experiencing right now, which is when students that are educated and potentially wanted to stay abroad come back from abroad and bring those skills. The Indian economy is quite strong and has transformed itself to now be one of the top economies in the world. There are a lot of opportunities for Indians. So whereas in Guyana's case, there are not or were not pre-oil as many opportunities for folks to dive in and stay employed, now they're looking at something very different in a place like India with reverse brain drain. So it's not all bad news. It's not all stark contrast here. However, this is not nearly where we are in Guyana. So I'm going to be a little controversial because I think everything that has been stated so far is based on the assumption that countries deserve their citizens and they have a right to their citizens' brains, if you will. So I will share this quote from Philippe Legrain. Poor countries have no automatic right to their citizens' labor or indeed their allegiance. I'll remind you guys that I started with I love Guyana, but this is true for my case as well. As an immigrant to the US, the opportunities that I've pursued here were not available to me, to my family, to family members back home. So what right do countries have to their citizenry, to the ability, to improve their standings without making an investment on their own? So this is where thinking about what education really looks like is very important. Opportunities that do not exist at home will warrant folks finding those opportunities abroad, to echo what some of the speakers have already stated. And does a country actually have the right to claim its citizens' brains and their ability and their power and their labor for its own gain if those citizens are not supported? So this is where brain waste comes into play as well. So I'm going to wrap it up because I know that we are short on time, but the 1870 Education Act definitely helped improve access to education. This is something that we will definitely want to maintain moving forward. I think student mobility and having the ability to pursue higher level studies abroad, if those opportunities are not at home, are integral to how places like Guyana, countries like Guyana, will improve. However, the resulting brain drain has also posed significant challenges, and those challenges are not going away anytime soon. So we have to make sure that the country has opportunities for those who would like to come back to return after they've pursued higher education, have the ability to do so, that their brain and their knowledge doesn't go to waste. And then we have to understand these dynamics in order to actually advance to a country with better standing, with greater opportunities for its citizens, and so on. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Excellent, Mark. Thank you very much for that. Again, we'll hold questions until our final presentation, and I want to introduce them now, but excellent information there. Thank you. Our next speaker Dr. Raghunath Mahabir is from right here on Trinidad and Tobago. He's an assistant professor at the University of the Southern Caribbean. He's also the coordinator of the master's program in National Security and Intelligence Studies. Welcome, Dr. Mahabir. Dr. Mahabir, can you unmute, please? You're unable to? Okay, Noor, can you assist, please? I don't want to say Dr. Mahabir and then we
Yes,
get
yes.
confused.
He's
Good,
there.
thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Yes, there are two Dr. Mahabirs here, which is good. Which is good. So thank you. And presentation, migration and brain drain in the Indian diaspora, and I'll be looking at the case of Trinidad. Next slide, please. So I want to I have 15 minutes, so I just want to break up my presentation into 4 pieces: the role of remittances and diaspora engagement, the current trends and policies, and we look at Vision 2020 and 2030 in Trinidad and Tobago. I want to look at the role of migration in the overall development of Trinidad and Tobago, and then, of course, look at the immigration and the brain drain itself and its impact. Next slide, please. First, I would like to give you a historical setting. Post-World War II, after World War II ended in 1945. From 1948 or so, there was a movement of persons from Trinidad and Tobago and the rest of the Caribbean to England. This movement was driven by the British government's need for labor to rebuild. It was more of a pull factor from Britain to the Caribbean. Evidence suggests that the majority of Trinidadians, though, who would have been going to London were the Afro-Trinidadians. The East Indians were hardly interested at that time. Let's say between 1948 and 1980, there was no significant interest in migrating, though there were some, maybe less than 20% of this number who would have gone to England, but it was not large. Next slide, please. Then things began to change in the late 20th century, meaning from around the 1980s. There were economic and social factors which contributed to low wages, unemployment, and they, of course, were significantly push factors that would have caused people to want to leave. And the destinations, of course, first was England and then Canada and the United States. Now, especially in the 1970s and in the 1980s, Trinidadians migrated. And two of the main reasons why they migrated was to escape racial tensions and to seek better opportunities. And of course, they often settled in areas like Toronto and they established strong community networks. Next slide, please. What are some of the, next slide, please. What are some of the current trends if we want to look at it? Well, as of recent estimates, there are over 225 Trinbagonians, Americans living in the United States, with significant populations in New York, Florida, New Jersey. And in Canada, there are, the last figures, 76,000 Trinidadians. Of these numbers, though, it has been difficult to gather information or sufficient data as to how many Indo-Trinidadians, how many Afro-Trinidadians. The evidence will seem to suggest that it is close to 60-40, meaning 60% of Indo-Trinidadians would have been migrating from the 1980s until the present day. And of course, this migration, as other speakers have already said, has contributed to a rich cultural diversity in these countries and has helped to build strong Trinidadian communities abroad. Next slide, please. Now, the thing about it is that, and the stats which have shown this already, other speakers have said it, the outward migration of graduates and skilled workers from Trinidad stands at 57.2%, and then over 75% of our skilled workers. So over, say, close to 60% of our graduates have been migrated, and over 75%. And the Trinidad and Tobago government has seen this. They are making steps to deal with it. And now what we have to fill that brain drain we are seeing groups of people from other countries coming into Trinidad, which we will talk about a little bit, but especially from the other Caribbean islands and other places such as India and China and the Philippines and so forth. They are coming into Trinidad, but still they have not been able to fill that gap, which has been existing since, say, the early 1980s. Next slide, please. Now, when we look at figures, the economic contribution of the diaspora through remittances are substantial and multifaceted. While we do not have figures, recently I have started a survey, and mostly in South, and we have spoken to people in areas such as Princeton and Siparia, and go down in southwest of the country, go down to places like Losuru and Erin and these places. And one of the reasons why I did this was because I taught at the Siparia Junior Sec for a while, where almost 3/4 of the class were dependent on the barrels that were coming in, and the money they were waiting on for their parents, for their grandparents. And while we do not have figures, because as one speaker rightly said, some money comes through Western Union, some money, they send the money in different ways, sometimes not necessarily through legal channels or documented channels. And there is no way that we can say, well, okay, $1 billion would have come. It will be a guess. But what we do know, however, is that thousands of families in Trinidad and Tobago receive remittances from their families abroad. And when we talk about the Indo-Trinidadians, for a while, it had stopped. We know that some in interviews, people have said that, when things got better, they didn't need the remittances. But then again, over the last, say, 8 or 9 years, things have gotten economically a little worse in Trinidad, and so that people have been asking asking for remittances, or asking their families to help them from States and Canada and even England. And we have seen, while we interview people, that yes, there have been an increase in remittances from their families in foreign countries. Next slide, please. Now, Trinidad and Tobago, the government has recognized that remittances is an important part. While internationally there has been the Global Forum on Remittances, in Trinidad and Tobago, we have developed what we call the national diaspora policies to engage diaspora, to engage our people away in ICT, in trade, in tourism, in healthcare, to ensure that they contribute to our society. And as to how well this is working, or how well it works, of course, depends on how well the government policies are in place, and the facilitation process, how well does it occur through our embassies and high commissions and so forth. And apparently, when it first started, it worked well. And recent evidence again will show that the national diaspora policies, when they are not followed up, or when they are not carried out, or where they do not get the teeth, that is to say, when the government doesn't push it, then there is always a lull, especially in the areas like ICT, trade, tourism, healthcare. And then sometimes we find that in certain areas like tourism, for example, a lot of money is being spent and we are not getting the proper return. So the national diaspora policies, sometimes they work well, and then sometimes they simply don't. Next slide, please. Now, all the speakers here have spoken on the brain drain, the issue of brain drain. And of course, it is particularly relevant, but not unique to Trinidad and Tobago. And I want to highlight some of the persons, because one of the previous speakers spoke about doctors. And yes, in Trinidad and Tobago, or from Trinidad and Tobago, the issue of teachers and doctors, nurses, leaving this country has been a big challenge for us, and has been a hindrance in the development process of the country. Trinidad and Tobago is plagued by alarming rates of brain drain, both in terms of skilled workers and professionals, as well as university graduates. Now, sometimes we talk about brain drain and migration, and we say, well, pull factors and push factors. And I think, again, over the last maybe decade or so, there have been a lot of push factors in Trinidad and Tobago. In one of our surveys too, we found out, like, after in Trinidad and Tobago, when the sugar industry was closed down, or Caribbean Limited was closed down, substantial numbers of former Caribbean workers between the ages of 20, 30, but maybe 20 and 45, I should say. Even in the area where I live in Barrackpore, where people were heavily engaged in sugarcane production for 3-4 generations. And when the sugar industry closed, several Indo-Trinidadians would have left, and their place of destination was, well, of course, North America, the USA, Canada, and in a few cases, in England. So the process has continued from, especially the sugar industry would have closed in 2003, and then we would have seen substantial persons who formerly worked in the sugar industry would have been leaving this country for betterment. Next slide, please. Now, we have made this point that over 75% of our university graduates are studying and living abroad. Of these, I think about 19% of them get their degrees from abroad, and they continue living. The problem with this is that it is going to affect the development of Trinidad and Tobago. The exodus of skilled workers is affecting the country's long-term economic development by preventing it from reaching a critical mass of human resources. That is to say, to develop a country, you need good human resources, excellent human resources, but you also need that commitment. You need that cultural factor where people believe that they are working towards the betterment of their country. And right now, even with the skilled personnel that are coming into Trinidad to fill that gap, we are not seeing it happen. Next slide, please. In addition to the flight of human capital, the record of low levels of employment have resulted in the inability to meet the labor demands in the services and manufacturing sector, construction, energy sector, medical profession, and teaching service. In Trinidad and Tobago, two tragic things have happened. Number one, in 2003, there was the closing down of the sugar industry. And then a few years ago, there was a closing down of the Point-of-Pear refinery. And this too would have caused a lot of unemployment, a lot of headache, a lot of heartache, a lot of people without jobs, and a reason to push people out of this country. Recent evidence suggests that a lot of Indo-Trinidadians who would have worked in the oil industry are now migrating or have now migrated, many of them to Guyana. Others, of course, have moved to the States, Canada, Scotland, and these other areas. The problem is that as well, that because of the flight of human capital, of all these skilled workers, there has been an inability to meet labor demands in the services and manufacturing sector in Trinidad and Tobago. And this, of course, has resulted in either you hiring people who are not able to do the job, or simply several industries either have, if not closed down, have had to reduce their output. Next slide, please. An important distinction must be made when it comes to the people who are migrated. It is not old people, young people between the ages of 20 and 45. And especially in a country like Trinidad and Tobago, which, you know, at one point in the 70s, we were extremely, well, I don't want to say rich, but we had a lot of money. It was not used properly. And now it's a difficult time. And in this difficult period, what we find is that our skilled persons are leaving. They are leaving, and they are leaving because of fear. And we mentioned some of the push factors already. And then the pull factors, of course, in these countries where they get their employment. Yes, they have problems. Sometimes there's a clash of cultures and so forth. But the thing about it is some of them are even, and you talk about brain exchange, some of them have gone to the United States, they have gone to Canada, they have had difficulties in getting jobs immediately. But nonetheless, in speaking to some of them, they tell you it is still better. They can earn money, they can send home money, they could feel comfortable. And more than anything else, they can feel safe. If you all would have seen, well, there have been surveys where almost 8 out of 10 people will tell you, and in Trinidad and Tobago, at this current time, they have a serious concern for their public safety. And this is one of the elements that have engineered a movement of people from Trinidad to other countries. Next slide, please. Now, what is the impact and what is current trend? The truth is that the country, Trinidad and Tobago, have been losing doctors, nurses, teachers, engineers. We have had a nursing shortage for quite a few years. 50% of the nursing positions in Trinidad remain unfulfilled, meaning that more than 50% of our nurses have migrated. When this happened, and although there is a possibility that nurses from other countries through the CSME could come into Trinidad, but it causes serious problems. Next slide, please. And I will talk of some of these problems, because when nurses leave, when doctors leave, and there's a shortage of healthcare professionals, and this has been happening, especially with the Indo-Trinidadian doctors, the Indo-Trinidadian nurses, they have been leaving because they get better opportunities. And what happens? There is a shortage of medical professionals in Trinidad and Tobago. There is a long waiting time in our hospitals and our nursing in our institutions. There's a reduced access to quality care. There is increased workload for the remaining staff. And of course, the movement, the migration of high-skilled persons negatively affects the health outcomes in Trinidad and Tobago, including increased mortality rates and reduced life expectancy. And this is something that I think any government should be looking at. When you start losing your medical personnel, when you start losing your people who have to take care of persons, then you realize that you're in trouble. Next slide, please. Education. Touched just before, the immigration of highly skilled teachers could lead to a shortage of educators in Trinidad and Tobago. And there are a few factors because of the so-called, if you want, the low pay, the low wages that teachers would have been receiving. And then also, and now in comparison to other countries, Trinidad is probably better in teachers. But some teachers recognize that, listen, after you do your first degree and then you get your master's, and you have a few years experience, you can go away and you can work as a teacher and maybe get 3 or 4 times the amount of money you're working for. So they leave. And then what happened when we have the skilled educators leaving, there's a loss of expertise. And it is a challenge. This is one of the impact of the brain drain. It is a challenge to maintain high educational standards. And of course, a lack of qualified teachers can negatively impact student achievement and of course, the overall educational outcomes. Let's go to the next slide, please. Then of course, there's a broader impact. There are the economic consequences. And we like to talk about development and growth and so forth, but the most important resources in any country are the human resources. And if you lose the expertise, you lose the innovation, then you're in problem. And this is what has been happening to Trinidad and Tobago. So therefore, we are saying that there are some policy challenges, and the Trinidad government, whichever government is in power or comes to power, will need to implement policies to address the negative impacts of highly skilled immigration, such as, well, they'll have to invest in education, they'll have to invest in training programs. If they want to develop a new generation of skilled professionals, the investment will have to be substantial, but it will have to be done. And what we are saying is that in the healthcare and education sectors, there have been a high rate of migration, and this problem needs to be fixed as soon as possible. Next slide, please. Under the Patrick Manning regime, there was a Vision 2020 plan. And the plan was really to see how best, at least a part of the development of the country, but to see how best you could stop this migration, stop this people leaving Trinidad and Tobago. It included, there were four main facets that we could talk about: the human development, economic diversification, innovation and entrepreneurship, and of course, infrastructure development. Infrastructure development, a lot of buildings were built. In terms of the human development, when you invest in education and healthcare and social services, of course, it is supposed to help. But while it was a plan, many aspects of the plan could not work or did not work, and especially in the investing in education and healthcare and social services. If one does an analysis of the amount of money was spent in education, healthcare, and social services over the last 20, 25 years, we would recognize that the money was spent, but it was not well spent. So that is to say, we have not been seeing really the benefits that come from it. And then this talk of, and this plan for economic diversification, where we will create more job opportunities and we will, reduce dependency on oil and so forth. That has not happened. That has not happened. Successive governments have come into power and the diversification in our country has not happened, which means to say that those people who would have been retained if the country was diversified, if the economy was diversified, because diversification has not worked. There is nothing really to keep persons, and this continues up to the present day, where after students graduate from the universities and so forth, and if they cannot get jobs, and our oil industry is really more or less in shambles, then they migrate. Next slide, please. There was a national youth employment policy, established by the government to more or less align the labor market's evolving needs with the education and training system. And they are trying to increase youth employment, reduce the job experience gap, and to promote youth entrepreneurship. Unfortunately, when we do analysis of this youth employment policy, we see also that it has not worked well, because it has been I don't want to say filled with, but it has been associated with some corruption, some mismanagement, and while it is the youth policy is there, it is not working, in favor of our people, so that again, it will not help people, will not stop people from wanting to migrate. Next slide, please. And then, of course, after 2020, the plan was extended, and there was the Vision 2030 plan, and cultural factors were discussed. They were identified, and there were a few things like positive work ethic and taking care of the environment and so forth. But it is, on paper, it is a good plan. It's an excellent plan to reflect the government's commitment to addressing the brain drain and to foster sustainability and so forth. But of course, in Trinidad and Tobago, like in many other Caribbean countries, there has been and is an implementation deficit. So as long as things are not implemented, then it doesn't make sense. If you have the best plan of all and it is not implemented, then we're wasting time. And therefore, the strategies that were bandied about to reduce immigration, to reduce the brain drain, if they have not been implemented, and if they have not been implemented well, then of course they cannot work. Next slide, please. So we are saying that the brain drain through immigration is a significant concern for Trinidad and Tobago, and we have to look at what could be done still, what Trinidad and Tobago could do. Of course, when we, academics, we may propose certain things, we don't know how well it would work, but 3 things that could be done are competitive salaries and benefits. They can be established. There can be professional development opportunities, and of course, tax incentives. Of course, these have to be policy directives, and unless this is done, the brain drain is not going to stop. Next slide, please. Another aspect, and I think Guyana is doing it as well, is trying to facilitate the return of skilled nationals, and establishing programs to help returning nationals to reintegrate into the local workforce. Of course, this program, the reintegration program, again, in Trinidad and Tobago, it's an excellent program on paper, but for those who have migrated and who have enjoyed public safety and personal safety, if it is that Trinidad and Tobago continues to be an unsafe place, it is going to discourage them and they are not going to come. The networking opportunities, where we create networks and platforms for returning nationals to connect with local industries, academic institutions, professional communities. From discussion with other people, the process itself is too much red tape, too much bureaucracy. And this, of course, is a disincentive to returning migrants. So that when people hear about, hey, I went back to Trinidad, but to get this paper or to get this certificate or to get a job here, it is difficult. We have not been facilitated. We would like to be facilitated. And of course, this further discourages people. The recognition of qualifications, of course, we have our own ACCT, and qualifications are, we look at people qualifications and of course we recognize them. And maybe this is one of the few aspects in the policy recommendations that we see working out well. But sometimes your qualification is recognized, but then there may not be any employment for you. Next slide, please. How do we enhance the local working environment so that we stop brain drain and we get back people to come back here? Invested in modern infrastructure, that is to say, having reliable internet, transportation, healthcare facilities to create a conducive working environment. These are all work in progress, I want to believe. Supporting innovation, supporting research, grants, subsidies, and so forth. Promoting policies to encourage a healthy work-life balance. These are all work in progress, and I believe that different governments, as they come in, will see the good in enhancing the local working environment to either keep our people from moving out and bringing back our people who would have left. And if this works well, our country will be in a better place. Next slide, please.
Dr. Mahabir, would you mind making your closing comments, please? We have just about 10 minutes for Q&A.
Yeah, so all I'm saying is that there are several measures that could be implemented to create a more attractive environment for professionals, to encourage people to stay and then to encourage people to come back. But unless the implementation process actually takes place, we will continue having the brain drain and we will not be able to bring back our migrants who would have left. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Quite a revealing presentation as well. I want to thank you so much for bringing us data, especially, and your comments. Your analysis was excellent. Professor Noreen Shepherd has her hand up. Welcome, Professor Shepherd. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed all the presentations. I was bumped off for a while, but I just wanted quickly to ask, and I don't know if I missed it because I joined late and I was bumped off for a while, whether there was an agenda breakdown in terms of those who are emigrating and those who are returning. What can you say about who is returning, who is going in terms of the gender dimension? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for that. Now, Professor Shepherd is from Jamaica. I wonder whether Dr. Deonandan can shed some light.
I didn't really hear the question. Could you repeat it for me?
She wondered whether you could make any distinction between the genders in terms of migration.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have that data. My feeling, my impression is that it's mostly male that we're talking about here in the medical community, but I couldn't say so for sure. I'm sorry.
Majority of males.
That's my impression, but I have no data to back that up.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Rahman? Can you unmute, please?
Yes. I think what was the question? Who is returning in terms of the gender? I think the question is addressed to like that. Are you getting my point?
No, sorry. Can you repeat that, please?
Yeah. What basically the question is being addressed to in terms of the gender? Who is returning back?
Yeah.
What is that?
Is it more males or females? Who's also
both
migrating? Is it more males or females from India?
From India, I think majority of the migrants are the male one. Exactly. But I think returning is also in both the ways. I think both are returning because government has this kind of policy to, I think, to give this sort of incentive so that they could return back to India and they invest here and they do something like that here.
Okay, thank you.
Exactly, data. When we talk of the migration, there is a very much crisis in terms of the data, in terms of even gender, in terms of many ways, category-wise, the data is unfortunately not available. So there's a need to generate data regarding that.
Right. Yeah. Thank you very much. Michael Thakur, go ahead, please. Mike, you're still muted. Are you able to unmute? Okay, while you work that out, let's take a question from.
I got it.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to make a quick point, which first of all, I'd like to say thanks for the very helpful presentations. But there is an area that I didn't quite see enough attention to, and it has to do with more recent developments globally. And many of us are aware of the fact that the brain drain that we see coming from countries like the Caribbean and elsewhere, particularly to the OECD countries, the rich countries, it may actually be that there is a wind of change that is taking place. There is more political resistance, as you well know, to immigration in many countries both in the US, as you probably are aware, and in Europe, and even in Canada, where there are stricter immigration rules now to dampen the hitherto more relaxed environment for migrants. And that is a phenomenon that we also need to be aware of, because this brain drain that we see may well be tempered by some of these political developments. It comes at a time paradoxically when these countries themselves are facing population declines or shortages in their labor forces because of aging populations, and in many cases their fertility rates are very, very low to replicate those populations. The SARC cases are in Japan, South Korea, Italy, and Northern Europe.
Mike?
Yes.
Mike, I'm going to ask you to please, if you do have a question, please bring it very quickly. We have just about 4 minutes left.
Right, but my main point though is to say that there is a development where the brain drain may actually be reversed to some extent by more recent political and other development and population developments in the OECD countries. But this may serve as a very useful opportunity for the countries that are the source countries, because if managed well, these economies can actually provide very good opportunities for their skilled workers and others who would otherwise be tempted to leave. And so it speaks to the important issues that was the previous speaker mentioned, having to do with incentives and provisions that would allow for people not so much to be educated and trained, because it's just creating more people who would leave. It's actually what do you provide for them when they are trained?
Right, and their contributions to the economy.
So that has to do with so we really only have two really big areas left with population dynamics that would support people staying. I mean, there's a labor force emerging in Africa and a few other places that remain where surplus labor remains, and the other areas are declining in population. So you may find that there's a lot more outsourcing that will take place. Some of it is happening in India, where people will receive lower wages but are tempted to stay because the cost of living is actually lower, so they can have a good life. And some of that is happening with where many of the companies in Europe and the US are actually outsourcing such activities.
Excellent.
So I think things are changing, and we really need to be mindful of this. That's my main
Thank
point.
you.
Yeah,
thank you very much for that. MK, you wanted to ask a question.
Yes.
Can you unmute, please?
Good. I'm just going to make one small comment. There are two things I would refer our esteemed panelists to glance at if they have not seen it. There's the Enabling Environment Conference that took place in 1986, both in Nairobi and in Kabul. It was the Aga Khan Development Network with the World Bank. I've sent you the link, Shalima. If you could share that, I'd be grateful. And second is a major report that came out last year on which I spoke somewhere of the World Bank. It's called World Development Report 2023, Migration, Refugees and Diasporas, Refugees and Societies. Again, it's a recent program where Canada played a major role, maybe worth looking at. That's all I wish to say. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, MK. Dr. Gangadas. Sorry, Dr. Ganga Ramdas. I saw quite a few comments in the chat, but if you have a question, please, let's take it very quickly. You're muted. Okay, we can hear you now.
Yeah, the presenters have identified the major determinants of the brain drain. One of the main issues is institutional building to absorb the professionals. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, that has tapered off. One of our dictators said, these institutions are of my creation and they will have to serve the creator. Now, nothing has really changed because in the public sector, you have to be vetted by politicians. In the private sector, we need land redistribution. The lands that are there now, it appears that it's used for infrastructure, roads, and that is to open up lands on both sides of the roads, presumably for houses. But we need homestead and we need agricultural land. All the closed sugar estates, what are happening to those lands? It's not given to the peasants and the locals. They are waiting for some big multinational or big company from China. I've looked at some of the small islands, and on the other side of the road, away from the sea, there are lands, but it's not given to the locals. In Chile, I had visited there. There are lands available, about 26% I had estimated, but it's not given to the locals. They're waiting for somebody else to come in and take advantage of those lands. So I think we have to have more sensible land redistribution programs in favor of the locals and in favor of the diaspora. Otherwise, we're not going to have a remigration of diasporans. They need incentives, as we have identified, and land is the most powerful incentive for us.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Ramdas. Excellent point. To members of the panel, we are at 5. I just want to go over for a few minutes. There's a question here that Chan from Fiji raised. Chan, you raised 2 different things, but I want to come to your dual citizenship question. Do countries that offer dual citizenship have better chances of reversing brain drain? Mark, can you comment?
My inclination is no, because their home base tends to be in their receiving country, not in their sending country. And I did want to address what Michael said about sub-Saharan Africa and the emergence of students studying abroad. Unfortunately for us, and this is where nationalism comes into effect, I will not mention our orange elephant in the room, but China is the #1 destination for students from Africa. So it's one of the few growing parts of the population globally. However, China is more attractive to them than the UK and the US currently. So that's going to be something for political reasons down the road when we come to development and some of that juxtaposition. That's going to be something we'll have to address as well.
All right, thank you very much for that. Chan is raising another point, the Fiji situation. She says, racial discrimination has been rife in civil service appointments and the coup culture and non-renewal of land leases. So racial discrimination, Dr. Mahabir, can you comment on this, please? Is he still here?
I'm muted.
Yes.
Yes. Well, in Trinidad and Tobago, we have had the we have the Equal Opportunities Act. We have legislation for that, and that arose because there was the perception and there was a discussion that there were a lot of racism in appointments, especially in state boards and even in public service. I think in Trinidad and Tobago that has more or less been rectified. You know, there's a little more transparency and openness in the employment of persons, but I'm not sure if the same is happening in places like Guyana and other countries. But I think there's definitely been an improvement in Trinidad and Tobago because of our legislation that has been passed over the last decade and a half. Thank you.
Dr. Roopnarine, Lomarsh Roopnarine.
Yes, I was in Fiji about 2 years ago, and the same question was brought up at a conference. And I do not have an answer to that question, but it's an ongoing thing in Fiji that if you're not a native, you do not own the land, that you have to lease the land. And that has been a bone of contention between the natives and the what they call the Indians, who are still seen as an immigrant group. And one question that came up in the conference is, when does one group cease to be an immigrant and become a citizen or a citizen? So that was one of the main questions that is stuck with me. So when I was listening to what you just read, it points to the fact that I do not have an answer for that, and I don't think the people of Fiji need to work on that some more.
Yeah.
That's it. That's my comment.
All right, thank you very much for that. Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we've run out of time. Mike, just hold that thought, please. We've run out of time today, but we've had an extremely enlightening session. I want to say thank you very much to all of our speakers and to you, members of the audience, for raising questions that that really brought us to think about this topic in different ways. So thank you all so much for this. Let me turn you all over now to Shakira.
Thank you, Shalama, and thank you all for taking the time to attend and to participate. As we said earlier, this public meeting is being hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center, and today we are pleased to be supported by Raj Jadoo of Trinidad and Tobago. And you can feel free to contact the ICC to publish your works. And remember, we are kindly asking for your suggestions, and if you give a donation, your name will be placed on our poster, and all promotional materials and Dr. Mahabir can be contacted for details. Our topic next Sunday will be aging, old age, and the elderly in the Indian diaspora. So we want to thank the planning and advisory team led by Dr. Kumar Mahabir, to Daryl Grantham and Navin Mangal, Ravin Ramsingh, and Miriam Mohammed. So please visit, like, and subscribe our YouTube channel to see all our past recordings. I am Shakira Mohammed from Trinidad and Tobago saying goodbye. May God bless you all. Dhanyavad.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to stop the that billboard video because my bandwidth is low, but we can spend I'm going to stop